I have completely had it with the CDC. I've had it. Now, this is not some personal vendetta other than the fact that the CDC, the Biden administration, public health officials, politicians who I elected to represent me are violating my rights. They're bossing me around. They're forcing me to adhere to anti-science political nonsense. And I've not only had it, you should have it too. We should be done with this. And I know big tech will probably kick me off for this episode. I thought about that before I prepared it. I don't care. I don't care. So what happened this weekend after the CDC renewed, we'll use that word, renewed their recommendation that even vaccinated individuals wear masks in indoor settings, patently ridiculous. I had friends and family start texting me. You all started writing to me, asking me for the scientific studies, the actual citations, not just common sense, not just saying a study said, but the actual links to scientific studies about the efficacy of face masks against viruses like SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the science of face masks, the science. I'm going to cite over 20 studies in this episode today. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to be able to have this episode in your pocket so that when any establishment, when any restaurant, when any store, when any individual bugs you, nags you, tries to shame you for wearing a mask, you know what to say. You know how to cite the studies. You know what the studies are so that you are empowered to fight back against this. Because if we don't fight back against this, big government will never stop trying to take power away from us. So the reason that I included these 20 different studies in the show today is, of course, what I just described to you, but it's also to counter this narrative from the left. The left has this narrative that claims that the right is anti-science. They tell us we're anti-science. Usually they tell us we're anti-science when it comes to climate change, simply because people on the right disagree with the policy prescriptions the left wants to implement when it comes to climate change. And what I'm talking about, of course, is the right doesn't want the Green New Deal. So because we don't want a big socialist government that redistributes wealth and essentially turns the United States into a Marxist state, the left tells us that we are anti-science. That's also what they say about COVID. Now, the right typically responds with almost a joke. Now, satire, of course, is lost on the left, so they take this very literally. But the right responds by saying science is fake. Now, of course, science is not fake. The term that we should use there is we should say the science, the quote unquote science being presented to us is fake news right now. The fake science being presented to us is fake news. But here's the thing. Not everybody going about their day, taking care of their family, going to work, working out, just trying to make it to the next day. Not everybody has the time to parse through the methodology of each and every study trotted out by the left in order to find the flaws, in order to find the manipulation, in order to find the fake news that the left is very strategically using. This is a strategic, it's actually a very slimy strategic move by the left to try to use medicine, to try to use science to back up their leftist political narrative. So I have the time to go through the methodology of these studies, so that's what I did today. I'm Liz Wheeler. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. Before we get to these 20 studies, let's talk for a second about ExpressVPN. Your family deserves to be safe and secure on the internet. There are so many pitfalls, so many dangerous things, so much nonsense on the internet itself. What makes it even worse is the idea that you could actually have your internet service provider essentially creeping over your shoulder and watching what you do, right? So internet service providers in our country, and I only learned this within the last couple months, internet service providers in our country can actually see every single search that you make on your computer. They can track every single website that you or your family has visited. And then not only can they collect your information, they sell that information to advertisers. So ExpressVPN is an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so that your internet service provider cannot see the sites that you visit. ExpressVPN keeps all of your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data with the most powerful encryption available. All you have to do is tap one button and you're protected. It's super easy to use, very user-friendly. So protect your online activity today. Visit my exclusive link, expressvpn.com/Liz, and you can get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/Liz. expressvpn.com/Liz to learn more. Okay, so this first study that I want to talk to you about today is huge. It's actually ironic because just this one study is really all we need to debunk the left's narratives here. We could be one and done. But I want to be thorough, so I have 19 others. Now, here's the part where we talk about big tech for a second. This is where we're at in our nation, where what I'm about to tell you is actually against YouTube's terms of service. If I say what I'm about to say and post it on YouTube, if I present scientific evidence, studies in peer-reviewed journals, and post it on YouTube, YouTube not only will block my video, they will potentially give a strike to my channel, ultimately leading to the complete banning of me on YouTube. So unfortunately, I don't want to be banned on YouTube because I want to be on the leftist big tech platforms, because how else do you reach leftists with reality? So if you want to listen to this entire episode, you can do so on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch this entire episode, you can do so on Locals at lizwheelershow.com/locals, censorship free. Unfortunately, I can't show you this part of the show, or the big tech overlords might delete this video and my channel. As you know, YouTube won't let me tell you the truth about COVID-19 or transgenderism and other important issues, even when I cite the specific studies. So if you want to watch the full uncensored version of this video, join me over on the Liz Wheeler Show community on Locals, lizwheelershow.com/locals. So I've been talking to this active duty naval officer recently who had previously tweeted a thread about possible vaccine mandates in the military. And he's not going to reveal himself publicly at this time for obvious reasons. He's worried about his career. He's worried about what will happen to him and his career, and even the military code of justice should his identity be revealed. But I'm talking to him, and he sends me a thread that he has written about what else is happening in the military, this corruption that has pervaded the military, this poisonous ideology that has taken hold in the military. And I told him that I would read this thread out loud on my show so that everybody understands in our country that the radical leftists, the Marxists, are now using the military the way that they're using the public schools to indoctrinate people in order to tear down the institutions in our nation that make us the moral, free society that we are, so that they can implement Marxism in the place of the institutions that they tear down. So I want to read this thread to you from this naval officer. It's not about COVID, and I will let you hear for yourself what it is in regards to. This is a quote from him. "Since I joined the Navy 15 years ago, much has changed. I'm now required to affirm that a man who has mutilated his penis is a genuine woman in order to keep my job." Well, that's awfully shocking, isn't it? He said, "Here's a thread on how we got here. I suspect that if 15 years ago I'd suggested that a man could actually become a woman, or that the military should get into the genital mutilation business, I'd have been sent for psychological evaluation and perhaps separated. That's how far we've come in a decade and a half. A complete and absolute inversion of what we knew to be true just a few years ago. But things change quickly," he said. "People in power shift their positions overnight. Recall that candidate Barack Obama believed marriage was exclusive to a man and a woman. Second-term President Barack Obama mentioned the Stonewall riots and transgenderism glowingly in his second inaugural address. The same is true of military leaders. For those of you in the civilian world, it's really hard to explain to you just what sort of godlike fear, awe, and respect these men command, to say nothing of the material rewards. If you don't think those are powerful hooks sunk deep into their skin, think again. They've spent lifetimes scraping, and sweating to get where they are, and they're not eager to see it disturbed. What began with an oath to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, has become a luxuriant career that makes them rich and strokes their egos into bonfires." So this naval officer continues, when policies like this one, demanding everyone play along with the delusions of the mentally ill, are issued, none of them says a word. Worse yet, they've been trained to pretend they agree. It's worth noting, he says, that the new generation of military members may have been duped into believing a man in a dress and a wig is actually a woman, but these men, he's talking about the leaders, know better. Or do you believe that every one of those 50 and 60-year-old men suddenly realized they'd been wrong all along? That Bradley Manning isn't a traitor and that Chelsea Manning is a hero? Be serious. The only thing worse than men crazy enough to believe this nonsense is men cowardly enough to pretend they do. And that's what they're doing. They're pretending in order to protect the careers they love so dearly. Let me be clear, he says. If you believe a man can become a woman, You're as mentally ill as the men in heels. Only you have no excuse. They are suffering a debilitating psychological disorder. You've merely been deceived. But again, these men don't really believe it. They're motivated by varying combinations of a desire to get promoted and a fear of getting fired. Those are their primary skill sets and chief character traits. Man, this is brutal. This is so brutal. He goes on to say, these are the men paid lavishly to defend our nation in case of war. Men who don't have the spine to speak an obvious yet suddenly unspeakable truth. Men who will force out of service everyone who isn't also a coward in order to maintain uniformity. In March, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that a professor at a public university cannot be compelled to use transgender pronouns. Here's hoping the DoD takes notice and backs away from these policies. Not that only religious people should be free of the pronoun tyranny, but don't think the DoD is at all concerned with its members' constitutionally guaranteed right to free exercise of religion. He says, I've spoken to very senior members of the military, people in genuine decision-making positions, and the response has been, get in line with the new policy or get out of the military. He says, I'm deeply ashamed to admit it, but in 15 years, I've never heard a single officer say something like, we just received a new policy directive. How are we going to interpret and implement it in light of the Constitution? He says, our oath to the Constitution has become just another string of meaningless words we say for the sake of tradition. The men at the helm have sold themselves for the most extravagant life your tax dollars can afford. In short, my continued employment in the Navy relies on my willingness to show up every day and publicly proclaim that the sky is green with pink polka dots. I'm not going to do that. This is funny. He says, for the record, I'm still more likely to say the sky is green with pink polka dots than I am to say that a man has become a woman. Why? There's a tiny chance the sky could do that one day. Not so for the man. It's bad enough to think that the people responsible for our national defense are insane enough to believe the most obvious lie. It's far worse to know that they don't, but have been cowered into saying it anyway. And for everyone who will call me transphobic, he says, it's not a phobia. I'm not scared of trans people as I am of the boogeyman. That is, I don't fear things that don't exist. Don't get me wrong. The men and women suffering this delusion exist, but as the men and women they are. And I wish them only recovery from what ails them. I'd no sooner hate a cancer patient than someone suffering this disease. The Soviets mastered the craft of demoralization, forcing people to tell lies they knew were lies. Why? Because each lie you tell chips away at your moral standing until you have no standing to resist whatsoever. If the most senior people charged with our defense can be convinced to publicly humiliate themselves by pretending men with festering wounds where their penises used to be are genuine women, our demoralization is complete. And if they'll fall in line for a lie this obviously absurd, I doubt there's much they'll stand up against. He concludes by saying, be very afraid for your security with people more concerned with their comfort than integrity, sanity, and reality itself running the show. It's hard to know what to add to that. It gave me the chills reading it the first time. It gave me the chills reading it out loud to you just now. Send this to your congressman. Send this to your elected officials. There's no doubt this is true. We all have family and friends that serve in the military. We all know that not only are they insane on COVID, we know that there's a strain of wokeness, political correctness, and yes, Marxism running in the military. The Democrats who have been in charge of our military in the past have inserted this ideology into our military, and the Republicans who've been in charge of the military have refused to eradicate it. Well, now is the time. We must demand congressional oversight to remove this from our military, because not only should our taxpayer money not be funding Marxist indoctrination, this kind of woke social experiment described by this naval officer could never defend our nation against an enemy who wanted to destroy us. This is a national security risk. Tell your member of Congress. It's bad enough when we see this kind of Marxist indoctrination in the private sector. And I hesitate to even call this the private sector, because even when you have a private university or a private college in our country, they always receive taxpayer dollars in the form of grants, research grants, and other kind of taxpayer money filters to these private universities. So there's not a college that I can think of in our country that is completely divorced from the taxpayer dollar. But now medical schools, I should say, have begun to stop teaching that there are two genders. These are medical schools. They're supposed to be beacons of science. But a University of California med school professor apologized recently. He was caught on video apologizing for saying the phrase pregnant women, because it's offensive, he said, to men and non-binary people who can also get pregnant. This is not an isolated incident to this particular woke, ridiculous, anti-science med school professor. According to the American Psychological Association, the terms natal sex and birth sex are considered disparaging. Now you're supposed to say the assigned sex at birth. Assigned sex. As if you can reassign it at a different time. This is true too of our government, the National Institute of Health, the NIH, the CDC, and yes, Harvard Medical School, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of all medical schools in our country. They are also actively making an effort to divorce sex from medicine altogether. They are instead championing the anti-science, Marxist idea of gender identity, that you are how you identify, and it has no correspondence whatsoever to your biological sex, your DNA, the science of the thing. Meanwhile, the American Medical Association and WebMD say that gender should be removed from birth certificates. This is a tweet from WebMD. Sex should be removed as a legal designation on the public part of birth certificates, the American Medical Association said on Monday. So when I read this, of course I fear for our nation. It's almost laughable that these people, these radical leftists, think that they can convince an entire generation of Americans that sex is not sex, that you can't tell if you're a boy and a girl simply by looking at your private parts and testing your DNA. But it's not laughable because that's what they're doing. They've taken a hold of the public schools, and now they're taking a hold of medical institutions. So this is my hope of what happens. My hope is that this kind of nonsense will spawn a generation of skeptics who question authority every single time. Skeptics who do not defer to anyone based on so-called expertise or college degree or years in their field of study, but instead require citations, verification, and proof of every single claim. My generation should say, we are done. We are done living in a paternalistic society where we take somebody's word for it just based on their resume. Because the radical left has hijacked these so-called experts in almost every field. Be a skeptic, question authority, because this is Marxism. Marxism attacks the nuclear family. It's like when Planned Parenthood back in the day used black pastors to try to convince black people in America to legitimize abortion. They used black pastors because black pastors were people of authority. They were experts. They were listened to. Their counsel was considered wise. So Planned Parenthood hijacked black pastors to legitimize abortion to the black community. Well, that's what's happening now with the field of medicine. That's what's happening with science in general. People believe doctors because people are in an incredible position of vulnerability when they're in an interaction with a healthcare provider. They want to believe that this doctor is caring for them and has their best interest and will use their expertise to help us and heal us. And so the radical left has hijacked science. They've hijacked the medical field. We can see it happening before our very eyes. Marxists are using experts and medicine and science to spread Marxism. So late last week, I did a long piece on the Simone Biles controversy, and I said Simone Biles is not a hero. Now, I did not mean this with any kind of harshness per se towards Simone Biles. I basically said either she choked and there's nothing heroic about that, or if she has a legitimate medical condition, again, I feel sad for her. I feel disappointed as an American fan of U.S. gymnastics, but there's nothing heroic about having a medical condition. There's nothing to be ashamed of if it's a legitimate medical condition, but it doesn't make you a hero to have a medical condition. Again, no harshness, just analysis. Now, I said if other information comes to light that changes the algorithm, then I'll be the first to update my opinion on this. And there was more information that came to light. Simone Biles expounded a little bit on what had happened to her. She said that she was suffering from a condition that she called twisties. Now, I guess this is gymnastics vernacular. It sounds to me, the way she described it is it's similar to vertigo, where the gymnast loses the connection between mind and body. So instead of being able to spot your eyes and twist and have your body, your reflexes respond to what your mind is telling it to do, you lose that connection. And so she posted a video on her Instagram story showing herself doing these flips and turns on the uneven bar and falling at the end because she wasn't able to have her mind tell her body to land in the way that she was supposed to land. Okay, that sounds like a terrible condition. It sounds awful. She also said that this condition, this mental condition, was brought on by stress, or at least it was brought on to her by stress. So the question here is, does this additional information change my take in any way? Does it make me say that Simone Biles, does it make me less harsh on Simone Biles? This is what I will say. Yes and no. All of my opinions are nuanced. You guys know that by now. It does sound like a legitimate mental medical health condition. Okay, no shame in that. Perhaps she can't help it. However, she says herself that it's brought on by nerves and by stress. So in a sense, even if it's a legitimate mental medical condition, the way she described it still is choking. She's had it before. So my question would be, does she have no protocol? Did her coaches and sports system have no protocol to help when it happens? Because if something happens to you when you're under enormous stress, you should probably pretty much assume that it'll happen when you're at the Olympics, because that's one of the most stressful athletic competitions in the entire world. It's certainly being televised all over the world, and Simone Biles was one of the star athletes. She's been promoted as the face of the Olympics here in the United States for months now. So I don't understand exactly the contradictions here. Also, Simone Biles is the one who said and said again and repeatedly said that she was sitting out of the team all around and then the individual all around and then some of the other individual events because she wasn't having fun and she needed to work on her mindfulness. So if there's any misunderstanding of what happened on our part, it's because she communicated exactly what we interpreted. So all in all, as I said, does this change my opinion? Yes and no. I don't know. Something doesn't quite ring true here. I'm still very disappointed. And as a former athlete myself, I just keep thinking of all the other girls who did not make the U.S. gymnastics team for the Olympics because Simone Biles did, knowing that stress brings on this condition and having no protocol to fix it in stressful situations like the Olympics, which you should assume is going to be stressful. So I don't know. That's my nuanced and not nuanced opinion on it. Take it or leave it. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and this has been widely ignored. It was ignored at the beginning, but now there's no way the mainstream media is going to talk about this. There's no way you're going to hear about this from Democratic politicians who claim to champion minorities. Remember when Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game out of Atlanta because of the Georgia election laws? They moved the MLB All-Star game to Colorado, which there's another episode where I run down how ironic it is that this All-Star game was moved to Colorado because some of the Colorado voting laws are actually stricter than the Georgia voting laws. Hilarious. Well, woke people are never great with irony here. Well, here's an update. Moving the MLB All-Star game out of Atlanta cost Black business owners $100 million. Picture that amount of money. Picture it on my desk, stacked to the ceiling. $100 million. That's how much Black business owners lost in the city of Atlanta because woke leftists pressured Major League Baseball to remove the All-Star game from the city. And remember why. Remember who's to blame here. It's not just these faceless leftists, these faceless woke social justice warriors. No. This was Joe Biden who was perpetuating this lie. Joe Biden is the one who called the Georgia election law a new Jim Crow. It was Stacey Abrams who claimed that this law targeted Black people. The highest ranking Democrats in our country perpetuated lies, absolute lies about the Georgia election bill, an insult to my intelligence, an insult to your intelligence, an insult to everyone in Georgia, their intelligence, thinking that you wouldn't read the legislation, the piece of legislation yourself, and find out that the narrative coming from Biden and Stacey Abrams and the left was an absolute lie. And now as a result, $100 million down the drain, $100 million that should have gone to Black business owners. Here's my question for Biden and Abrams and all the rest. What about those Black lives? Do those Black lives not matter? And if not, why not? Why is this not a bigger story? And on that note, the great and powerful Jay Hay says we are out of time today, but we have a lot more coming your way tomorrow. So before then, think for yourself, use critical thought, reject critical theory, question authority, follow the facts, and don't let government or corporate wokeism or cultural Marxism or anybody bully you into being a sheep. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. Write us a glowing review. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please pass this episode along to your friends and family so that they know the reality and the truth, the science. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show. The Liz Wheeler Show is produced by Jonathan Hay, executive producer Chad Abbott, director of photography Kevin McRoberts, editor Alejandro Figuerella, assistant editor Michael Wall, sound mixer Robin Fenderson, post-production manager Victoria Metzel, director of marketing Emily Washler, production and talent coordinator Matt Toffler, senior publicist Patricia Jackson, and production assistant Mickey Pisani. This has been a Soundfront production.